Have you ever felt like your thoughts kind of have a life of their own? Like they're kind of steering you in directions you didn't exactly plan on going.
It's like being on autopilot sometimes, right?
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today with this book. It's called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And it basically says that feeling, that subtle pull of our thoughts, it's not just some random thing. It's actually how we build our realities.
It's wild. What I love about this book is it doesn't just say, think positive and call it a day. It goes way deeper. Like James Allen was really onto something when he wrote this back in the early 1900s. He was basically saying our thoughts are creative. They're not just these fleeting things in our heads. They're seeds. And those seeds grow into our character. And guess what? Our character, that's what shapes our circumstances.
Okay, so unpack that a bit. I mean, how do our thoughts actually create our reality? I think that's where a lot of people get tripped up.
Right, it sounds kind of out there when you first hear it, but Alan uses this really cool metaphor of the mind being like a garden.
Okay, I like that. So we're the gardeners. Yeah.
Exactly, you're the gardener of your own mind. You get to choose what you plant there. But here's the catch. If you just let your garden run wild, don't pull any weeds, don't tend to the soil, what happens?
You get a big old mess of weeds.
Exactly, it gets overgrown. And Alan says we all have those weeds, those negative thoughts, limiting beliefs, fears, we all have them.
Oh, absolutely. I know I've got a whole section of my garden dedicated to those.
Right. But the good news is we don't have to let those weeds define our garden. We can choose to be conscious gardeners, right? We can cultivate something beautiful and intentional.
So how do we do that? How do we go from a weed-infested mess to a thriving garden?
Well, it's not just about thinking happy thoughts and expecting everything to magically be amazing. It's about understanding that whatever we consistently focus on, those thoughts become the building blocks of our reality. So if we're always focusing on negativity or limitations or what we're afraid of, guess what?
Those things start popping up in our lives.
Exactly. Alan actually says, man is literally what he thinks, his character being the complete sum of all his thoughts.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement. So we're literally building a shaky, unstable life if we're always dwelling on the negative.
It's kind of like building a house, but instead of using sturdy bricks, you're using like flimsy scraps of wood and hoping for the best. It might look like a house on the surface, but it's not going to hold up very well when the storms come, right?
Right, it's going to crumble.
Yeah.
And I think that's where some people might push back a little bit because they might say, well, hold on a minute. What about all that stuff that happens in life that's totally outside of my control? Bad luck, other people's choices, unexpected challenges, all those curveballs life throws our way. Are you telling me my thoughts are responsible for all of that?
That's where it gets really interesting. See, Alan would argue that even those external circumstances, as much as they might feel beyond our influence, they often mirror our internal state. And he has this famous quote. I love this one. He says, men do not attract that which they want, but that which they are.
Ooh, I like that. Okay, so it's not about blaming ourselves when things go wrong.
No, not at all. It's about understanding this powerful connection between our inner world and our outer world. It's about recognizing that our thoughts and beliefs, they create a sort of frequency that we're putting out into the world, and that frequency attracts similar experiences.
So if we're vibrating at a frequency of fear, lack, and limitation, we're more likely to attract situations that reflect that energy back to us.
Precisely. And Alan gives this really interesting example in the book to illustrate this point. He talks about a man who's constantly facing financial hardship. He resents his poverty, blames his circumstances, feels like a victim of his environment. But here's the thing. He also refuses honest work. He tries to deceive his employer, and his whole perspective is rooted in this sense of scarcity and lack.
So his external reality is almost like a mirror, reflecting back his internal state. His thoughts and beliefs are actually keeping him stuck in the very circumstances he wants to escape.
Exactly. And this is where we have a choice. We can either stay stuck in that cycle of blame and victimhood, or we can start to recognize the power of our own thoughts and choose a different path. It's not about blaming ourselves for our circumstances. It's about using them as valuable feedback to understand ourselves better. It's about asking ourselves, okay, what is this situation reflecting back to me about my own thoughts and beliefs, and how can I use this awareness to grow?
So it's not enough to just clear out the negativity then, right?
Yeah.
You can't just sit around thinking, oh, I am abundant, I am successful, and expect a big pile of money to magically appear.
You got it. And Alan talks about this, the power of purposeful thinking. It's not just about like having these vague positive thoughts floating around in your head. It's about taking those thoughts and aligning them with a clear intention. It's like, what's the vision you want to create with those thoughts?
So it's like setting a destination before you head out on a journey, right? You don't just get in your car and start driving without knowing where you're going.
Yeah. Exactly. You'd end up totally lost, right? Or just going in circles. And it's the same with our thoughts. Without that clear purpose, that destination in mind, we're just kind of drifting along, letting external circumstances toss us around like a ship without a rudder.
Okay, I'm with you.
Mhm.
So how do we go from those like vague positive vibes to that kind of laser-focused purpose?
Well, Alan would say it starts with recognizing the power of vision. And to really illustrate this, think of someone like Christopher Columbus. I mean, he had this crazy vision of reaching the East by sailing west.
And everyone thought he was nuts, right? They thought he'd sail right off the edge of the world.
Exactly. But he held on to that vision, even with everyone telling him he was crazy, even with all the fear and the doubt and the setbacks, he just kept going. And eventually, because of his unwavering belief in that vision, he literally reshaped the map of the world.
It's amazing when you think about it that way. And it's not just Columbus, right? I mean, every invention, every social movement that shifted our understanding, every amazing work of art, they all started as just a thought, a vision that someone dared to hold on to.
That's what's so inspiring about all of this. It's not just for these extraordinary people in history books, it's for all of us. And Alan says this so beautifully in the book. The vision that you glorify in your mind, the ideal that you enthrone in your heart, this you will build your life by. This you will become.
This you will become. I got chills. But it's also kind of a lot of pressure, right? Like, no matter where we are in life, we have this incredible capacity to choose a different vision for ourselves, to actually become someone different.
That's the potential that Alan is putting forth. Of course, it's not always easy. We're human, right? Life is full of challenges, and our minds are wired for negativity bias, so we're going to have those negative thoughts. Plus, it's not like we can just close our eyes to all the negativity in the world and pretend it doesn't exist. There are real problems out there, difficult people, and sometimes really tough things happen.
Exactly. And that brings up another big idea from the book, this idea of serenity. But Alan's not talking about living in some blissful bubble, right? Like where we pretend everything is perfect and just ignore anything that's unpleasant.
No, not at all. He's talking about cultivating a deep inner peace, an unshakable core that helps us navigate life's inevitable storms with more grace and wisdom. Like, imagine being in the middle of a chaotic storm, but instead of getting swept away by the wind and the waves, you have this inner anchor that keeps you grounded.
So it's less about avoiding the storms altogether and more about learning how to, like, sail through them.
I like that analogy. It's about cultivating inner strength and resilience. Because think about it, when you're stressed out or overwhelmed or just totally anxious, are you thinking clearly in those moments? Are you making the best decisions?
Definitely not my finest moments. I am much more likely to, like, react impulsively or get stuck in my head overthinking everything.
Exactly. Stress just kind of hijacks our brains. But when we can tap into that inner calmness, that serenity that Alan talks about, it creates the space for clearer thinking, for more creative problem solving, for wiser responses. And that's such a powerful place to be, no matter what's going on around you.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do we cultivate more of that serenity? Is this where we get into all the meditation and yoga retreats and stuff?
Those are great tools, for sure. But Alan would probably say it starts with our thoughts. He has this line in the book, calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom. And I think it's interesting that he links serenity directly to wisdom.
So it's not just about being like chilled out all the time. It's about cultivating a deeper understanding of ourselves, of how our minds work, and making conscious choices about what we allow to take root in our mental garden.
It is. It really is. It's a practice just like anything else. Like, you're not going to walk into the gym for the first time and be able to deadlift 500 pounds.
That's a terrifying thought.
Right. So it takes time. It takes effort. And you're going to stumble along the way. You know, you're going to have those moments where you're like, ugh, why am I even trying? But it's about progress, not perfection. And I think that's something that Alan emphasizes throughout the book.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Like, he's not saying we have to reach some like perfectly serene state where we never have a negative thought ever again. I mean, that's impossible, right?
Right. We'd be robots at that point.
Exactly. So it's more about just building our capacity to meet those inevitable challenges with more awareness and to choose our responses.
And to have compassion for ourselves along the way, right?
Yeah.
Because we're all learning and growing. But one of the things Alan talks about is this idea of really paying attention to our reactions, like noticing how our thoughts are directly impacting our feelings, which then impacts our behaviors.
It's like he's saying we need to become scientists of our own minds, like observing, taking notes, experimenting.
Yes. It's like we're training our minds to be more resilient, more adaptable, more able to handle whatever life throws our way. I mean, you wouldn't like decide to run a marathon tomorrow without putting in any training, right? You'd probably injure yourself.
Oh, for sure. I could barely make it up a flight of stairs without getting winded. But it's true. We expect so much from our minds. Like, we want them to just be these, like, beacons of peace and positivity, but we don't often put in the work to actually build that mental strength.
And that's where the connection between serenity and wisdom really comes into play. Because as we cultivate that inner calmness, it gives us the space to actually look at our thoughts honestly. It's like we can finally see those patterns, those habits, those limiting beliefs that might have been running the show for years without us even realizing it.
It's like we're finally seeing the matrix.
Yes, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. But the good news is that self-awareness, that's the foundation of growth. That's how we start to make different choices.
This has been such a great conversation. It's amazing how these ideas, even though Alan wrote this book over a century ago, they're still so relevant today.
Right. It's like he tapped into something timeless about the human experience. And the thing I love most about his message is that it puts us in the driver's seat. Like, we're not just victims of our circumstances. We're not powerless against our own thoughts. We have this incredible capacity to choose. And in choosing our thoughts, we shape our reality.
We become the architects of our own lives. So if we were to leave our listeners with one thing to really ponder after this deep dive, what would it be? What's the question we hope will stick with them?
I think the question is this. If you could design your life like an architect designs a building, what would you change starting today, simply by shifting your thoughts? What limiting beliefs would you need to, like, demolish to make room for a stronger foundation? What empowering vision could you start building brick by thoughtful brick?
Those are great questions. And it's a great reminder that we all have that power within us to create real change, to build a life that we love, that we're proud of, that reflects our deepest values. And it all starts with that next thought, that next choice. It starts with planting that first seed.
Love that.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the power of thought. And until next time, remember, you are the architect of your reality.